Thank you. Okay, so our fourth chapter, which is quite a bit shorter than our last one, really is a bit of a culmination in all of the things that we've talked about. So using data for practice design and developing customized practices, and I just love this concept of customized training for our players, because the more we know about our players, the better we can be for them. And in this context, it's about using the data and using all of our measurements to figure out for every player on our team. And we may be coaching a professional pair, in which case we have two people, or we may be coaching a college team and we have 16 people, or we have a smaller group of 4 or 5. It's really important to understand and use the data to figure out for each one of the 5, she's not just a member of a group, she's an individual person and player, and what does she need from this practice? And her needs might be different from another player on the team. And so this concept of a group training where everybody passes and then everybody receives and then everybody sets and then everybody serves and then everybody sides out and then everybody goes home is probably not the best thing for each of those people in the practice, because some of them have strengths and weaknesses that dictate more or less training in particular areas. And so what we started to do is, once we were able to use the data to figure out for each player on our team their proficiency level with each skill, we were able to put players who weren't proficient in a practice environment or on a court that spent more time on that skill than players who were already proficient at it, according to our measurements. And so for service reception, for example, it wasn't that some players didn't train serve receive, because we all know that's a critical aspect of the game that every player should train for every practice. But if we've devoted, say, 30 minutes to service reception skill development in our practice, we should know that there may be 3 players out of the 10 who need 50 minutes, because the numbers dictate that they need more training in that skill. And some of the players just need the base amount of 30 minutes. If we know that some players' first ball kill is at 30%, and we expect it to be at 55%, let's say, then we take the players who are at 55%, they go through their training, and then we move them to another skill. But we use the players who are underperforming in that skill, who need more coaching, who need more repetition, who need more feedback. We allow them 40 minutes in that skill. So that concept of customized training for individual players based on their performance metrics is one that I think the coach owes to the players, because at the end of the day, at the top, this is about player development. And that essentially was the culmination of all of this data, of all of this learning. It's fun to learn. It's fun to write articles about the stuff we found. But at the end of the day, it doesn't mean anything unless we are taking the information and changing the humans that we have in front of us. That's the coach's task, as I see the job. And so this allowed us to do that. It allowed us to, in blunt terms, it allowed us to move the needle for the best player in the group and move the needle for the worst player in the group out of the same practice, rather than simply getting the player who's performing the least well better, and the top player kind of not getting improved or getting ignored. And so the question becomes, how do we manage all of this? And again, I think that's for the individual coach to kind of learn, depending on the size of our staff and the number and type of our resources. Our system was, we used Excel a lot to just generate data reports. We did a lot of just math on paper. We watched a lot of film after the fact to get this data. Some of our games or drills, we would collect data live with a whiteboard, and we trained the players to know how to do it, so they could perhaps go through the drill and record some of those results themselves, and we would simply take a picture of the whiteboard and have the data. Excuse me. But much of it was simply by videotaping all of our training sessions and all of our competitions, and then spending time at night and after practice in our offices or our homes watching it and recording the results of all of these plays to get the data on offense, on kills, on reception quality, on service, on transition, and so forth. We just generated really a fairly simple metric where we uh, created down a left margin, a left axis of player names, and across the top the data categories, and we put the performance metric in the boxes, and we then color coded it according to 4 standards. We color coded it green if it met the standard that we talked about earlier for us. We color coded it red if it didn't meet the standard. And then between red and green, there were 2 others. So red was not efficient or not proficient. We then used orange to be a little bit closer. Yellow was a little bit more close, and then green was proficient. And so we simply created charts and we color coded them. And then, so in an instant, when it came down to designing practice for the day or the week, we were very quickly, based on our color coding system, able to determine which of our players needed to spend an impression on what skills. And so that was essentially the foundation from which we would build our practice plans. And then we had to figure out how many courts are we going to be able to use, which is to say, how many courts do we have the luxury of using? If you have 1 court, this is a challenge. If you have multiple courts, it gets a little easier. If you have more of a staff, it gets easier. And we were able to figure out who needed more, who needed less, and divide up and design a practice so that everybody was essentially not constantly, but regularly spending most of their practice working on the things that they weren't yet proficient at. And we thought as coaches, well, now we're doing something. Now we're really giving the players an opportunity to improve on their weaknesses and perform their best in competitions. So that was really our system for using our data to design practice and customize training.